Good evening, friends. The sun is set, and I'm back with another tale from my collection. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the night with a story I call COVID10T. He stared at the computer screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. Surreal seemed ineffective to explain the feeling he was experiencing. It was not possible. His finger hovered above the right mouse button as the cursor sat on delete history. One quick click, and it would all go away. His mind drifted back to when all this first began as he tried to make sense of it. In late 2019, he read articles in the online news about several Chinese scientists who were being deported after it was discovered they were working on bioweapons at a prestigious university. While the research was sanctioned by the government, their collaboration with a lab in their home country was not. It was not until many months later that he realized the significance of this. Toward the end of winter in early 2020, he seemed to be suffering from allergies after a particularly warm spell of weather. He had never had an allergy in his life, and in fact, was proud to say that the only thing he was allergic to was people he did not like. But the area where he now resided was inundated with cedar trees, and it was not uncommon for even those who did not have allergies to be negatively affected by what was called cedar fever. But this time it was different. The upper respiratory irritation seemed to last for more than a month and resulted in an almost continuous postnasal drip. When he was still affected by it after a particularly harsh late winter freeze subsided, he knew it could not be cedar fever because there was no way there was pollen in the air after that freeze. He even went to the doctor to be swabbed and tested for flu or other illnesses, but was given a clean bill of health. The doctor said it was simply cedar fever. It was about this time he became aware of an epidemic in the same region of China as the lab where the research was being conducted on the bioweapons. The world watched as this new disease ravaged the small community. Doctors worked furiously to identify the unknown virus, and theories began to pile up nearly as fast as the corpses. Of course, since the disease was within China, a hardline country where personal freedoms and information were strictly controlled, information was hard to come by. When news did come, it was considered sketchy at best. The official word was a new variant of SARS, more specifically a COVID virus, had found a way to breach the species barrier from bats to humans. The Chinese government traced the disease origin to a marketplace in the village where the lab was located and stated it was contracted when someone ate infected bat meat. Upon hearing this, he laughed uncontrollably for a while as he recalled a joke by a British comedian regarding the AIDS virus. In the joke, the infected victim was told by his doctor that the only way he could have been infected was by having sex with monkeys or by getting blood on himself while cutting monkey meat in preparation for cooking. Of course, the victim was preparing dinner. It did not take long for the virus to escape the country and cases began to develop in Europe. Within just a few weeks, the epidemic became a pandemic as it was sweeping the world. Scientists dubbed it COVID-19, as it was the 19th known variant of the virus. The first, though, which could jump the species barrier to humans. Whole cities in Europe were brought to their knees and mass quarantines were instituted. Thousands died, and communities were overwhelmed by not only treating their ill, but also with burying the masses of dead. It became so bad that communities were forced to store the dead in refrigerated trailers normally used for hauling food until they could be properly laid to rest. Then it reached the United States. While it had actually been in the country since the very beginning, there were only isolated cases of an unknown disease. These cases were only identified later when doctors worked to track the path of the pandemic. It could not have come at a worse time. The United States was embroiled in a bitter upheaval as racial tensions reached a breaking point after the death of a man at the hands of authorities. Widespread rioting occurred, fueling public anxiety and opening the door for smaller factions of idealistic groups to leverage agendas. Some participated in the rioting, using it as a cover to engage in anarchy, while others, trying to express their political ideology, were seen as an additional threat. At the same time, it was an election year and the political groups were savagely opposed. Mainstream media abandoned their long-established neutral position and allowed political ideals to shape the news and information they provided. Misinformation became so widespread that mistrust became the watchword. In short, people did not know what to believe anymore, and this gave rise to conspiracy theory. For a while, it seemed to him that the whole world had fallen apart. People rioted to protest police violence. The sad part was, the rioters were destroying their own communities and creating further victims of themselves and their neighbors. Attempts were made to reduce or eliminate police departments without regard to how they would provide personal security without law enforcement. As time progressed, these same people who wanted to eliminate the police found themselves victimized by criminals and, of course, called upon the police for protection. Younger generations were engaging in an effort labeled cancel culture, in which they tried to forget history and forge a new way of thinking by destroying statues and monuments they did not like. No one stopped to consider that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Looking back, he realized these were not the only things happening at the time, as there was concern over global warming. Second Amendment supporters continued to fight for the right to keep their guns against groups pushing legislation to restrict and even abolish firearms, and social justice warriors of all types fought to promote their causes. Free speech and free thinking were being infringed at every turn, and any politically incorrect word could be the cause for immediate assault or even legal action. His mind was a whirl as he tried to comprehend all of the different aspects that made 2020 such a harrowing year. And through it all, the pandemic did not stop, but in fact grew worse as it ravaged the largest cities in the United States. Fear gripped a large portion of the population, and they submitted willingly to quarantines and protective measures to stop the spread of the virus. In point of fact, the riots and demonstrations were a large contributor to the spread of the virus, as people were in close physical contact in large groups. This virus was not typical in its transmission, being limited to a single means of spread. It was airborne, while at the same time resident on unsanitized surfaces. It could lie dormant for long periods and even survive heat and cold, but the worst part, it was able to mutate and adapt. At some point during 2020, when he was researching the disease to better understand it, he came across several scientific journals. These were academically peer-reviewed and published by the scientific community, so he felt they held more merit than mainstream media ever would. In one document discussing the origins of the COVID-19 virus, he found that scientists had long been studying the COVID diseases. Laboratory experiments to identify why the virus could not breach the species barrier were conducted, leading to genetic experimentation which ultimately resulted in the formation of COVID-19. The virus was a man-made bioweapon. His mind connected the dots, and he realized the people who were deported back to China in 2019 must have been part of this work, as the virus originated in the area of the lab they were working with. The whole story about eating bat meat was obviously just a cover by the Chinese government to keep them from looking bad. Sure, monkey meat. While this unraveled the mystery of the origin for himself, it did not help him to understand the disease itself. In September, he was not only still feeling the effects of cedar fever, but he was also continuously finding himself extremely fatigued. When the quarantines began, his wife's employer provided her with equipment to establish a home office so she could work from home. He, on the other hand, was considered essential, as his job was working on refrigeration equipment and it was important to keep food safe for the public. Not everyone in the industry embraced the need to keep working, and some decided to opt out and remain in quarantine. This increased the workload for those who remained. All summer long, he tried to work through the fatigue as he thought it was due to the increased workload and hours. Then in September, after taking a week vacation, he found he was still exhausted and was not able to even do the things he wanted to on vacation. So he went to the doctor and asked to be tested for things that caused fatigue, including COVID-19. The tests all came back negative. No COVID, no low testosterone, no diabetes, no anything. He was perfectly healthy except for the sinus irritation. Was he just getting too old? He looked around at people 10 years his senior and saw that they had more energy. They were not worn out as easily as he was. Maybe he was just too overworked. He continued to work through it all winter until the spring of 2021. He found he was just too wore out and could not keep it up any longer. He began to look for another job. Settling into the new job, he found he was not as tired as he used to be. He was no longer required to work overtime, nor be on call 24 hours a day, and the work he did now was to maintain equipment instead of repair it. Repairs were left to another shop, which he supported. It was a positive change. While researching to try and understand his fatigue all those months, he came across many conspiracy theories. A lot of them had to do with the virus and how it affected people. He had ruled this out due to the negative tests from the doctor. He did not even have the antibodies to show he had ever had the disease, so it was not a concern. Over the past year, the government made strides to find a vaccine for COVID-19 as well as prescribing protocols for limiting transmission. These were generally accepted, but the introduction of the vaccines was not well met. People did not trust a vaccine that had not had long testing. They felt like they were test subjects despite the best efforts of the medical community to assure the general population that the vaccines were safe and effective. Conspiracy theory began to run deep. Social media became a breeding ground for doctors and other health professionals that did not trust the vaccines to spread their opinions. Alternate treatments were devised, and some of these were actually very dangerous. More dangerous than the disease itself. Some theorized the disease was a planned epidemic by the New World Order to inflict population control and fear into the people so they could be more easily controlled. People began to look closer at the development of the vaccines and found that some of their most prominent financial supporters were billionaires who had already profited on the disease in one way or another. There was no regard given to the personal aspects the disease had on them, nor the philanthropical nature of their research support. One of these rich people is a technology giant with an affinity for biohacking, better known as chipping humans. Conspiracy theorists devised that he had somehow managed to get nanites into the vaccines, effectively chipping anyone who receives the vaccine. Nanites are microscopic robots made up of organic biomass such as proteins and polynucleotides, or inorganic elements like metals. At the University of California, San Diego, researchers developed nanobots capable of cleaning blood toxins generated by bacteria. When people think of chipping, they think of chips used in their dog or cat. These are about the size of a grain of rice, implanted under the skin to help find their home when lost or record medical information. Most understand that RFID, radio frequency identification, in the chip is passive, meaning it does not transmit a signal and must be read by a reader machine. But conspiracy theorists, having seen the movie where people are used as avatars controlled by brain dust nanites, take it one step further. They theorize that much like in the movie where the humans are controlled, the government could also assert control after the introduction of nanites. Since it has been established that nanites can be programmed to remove toxins from the blood, It is not too much of a step to think they could also be programmed to record brain signals, track DNA, or even reprogram DNA. Each nanite can be programmed with its own instructions and code. What they do depends on the programming. Creating an internal RFID to be read by machines is not far-fetched at all. He also considered the fact that 5G cellular service has been introduced and put into place in the last several years. People were very wary of the 5G because of its power and reach. Could the 5G actually be the machine readers for mass RFID in addition to cellular signal? Within a month of starting the new job, medical institutions started to mandate their employees be vaccinated for COVID-19, and there was talk the government would also mandate vaccination for federal employees. Since his wife was employed by one of these medical companies, and he was now employed by a government contractor, it would be necessary to get vaccinated if they wanted to remain employed. Neither of them wanted to get the vaccine. Aside from the conspiracy theories, it was relatively new and untested. This meant that they, like others, would be the test subjects. Among the people he worked with, about half were vaccinated. Among the unvaccinated were the holdouts like himself and a few who flatly refused. For several weeks, he discussed the conspiracy theories and other aspects of the vaccines with his coworkers. In the end, he decided to get vaccinated. Part of the reason for getting vaccinated was his own desire to retain the job. Another part was to go first to help give his wife the confidence to get it as well so she could remain employed. The facts of life in these times were that both of them needed to work in order to sustain the level of living they had attained. To give himself the needed push, he looks back at his history in the military. He had been poked and given most every vaccine known to man while a soldier. One more shouldn't matter. Several of his co-workers decided to get the vaccine at the same time he did. While he did not suffer any side effects, a couple of them were mildly sick for a couple days after it, with the predominant complaint being diarrhea. By the next week, they were all fine and life went on. The vaccination was a two-part process. 3 weeks after the initial dose, he went back for the second, and as before, he suffered no side effects. His wife also received the first shot, which made her mildly ill for a couple days, and after her second dose developed some joint inflammation. Her doctor said that would disappear in time. Within a couple months of being vaccinated, the government mandated federal employees and contractors must be vaccinated. Non-compliance by the due date would result in termination of employment. The status would be listed as a voluntary termination, and as such, one fired for not getting the vaccine would not be eligible for unemployment benefits. As the deadline for compliance drew closer, he and his co-workers who were vaccinated encouraged the remaining holdouts to take the plunge. All of them did, except one, a man named Tommy, who was the same age as himself. Tommy was buried so far into the conspiracy theories that he would not even consider getting vaccinated. He ranted daily about it and quoted the things he read or heard to others. Some of it was pretty far out there, and he was beginning to sound completely nuts at times. But he was a good guy, and they all understood that he did not trust that it was safe due to the speed with which the vaccine was produced. He was even able to find a quote from the President of the U.S. from 2 terms prior that foretold the coming of the virus. Of course, this bolstered his belief that it was all a government conspiracy. While he did not agree with all the conspiracy theory, he did like Tommy and hoped he would decide to get vaccinated so they could remain working together. In an effort to help Tommy move in the right direction, he began to joke about the conspiracy theories. He poked holes in the ones he could and outlined opposing theories to the rest. He sent Tommy a message. T. I read that the tech giant did put nanites in the vaccine, but not to control anyone. They are strictly for culling the population. Once everyone is vaccinated, or as many as they can get to accept the vaccine, there will be a worldwide signal broadcast. Some will drop dead, while the rest will be programmed to see the unvaccinated as high-functioning zombies that are determined to eat the vaccinated. Get ready for the apocalypse, dude. Which side are you playing on? I'll either be pushing daisies or blasting heads. Tommy never responded to the message. He hoped he had not hurt his feelings or angered him. As he lay in bed that evening, he said his prayers, and one for Tommy. In reading the news after work, he saw that in Europe people were being refused entry to restaurants, bars, and movie theaters unless they could prove they were vaccinated. It concerned him. How long before they started doing that with grocery stores and hospitals? As he fell asleep, he also prayed that when he woke in the morning, he would not be exhausted. As before, he had been finding himself waking in the morning, feeling as though he had already worked a full day and getting very wore down by the middle of the day. Was he just getting old? He could not afford to retire yet, and could not even think of drawing Social Security for at least another 7 years. How could he get by if he did not work? His sleep was fitful, and toward the end he kept having this recurring dream that bothered him. After using the restroom, he found that he was not going to be able to go back to sleep, so he went to his desk and sat for a smoke. There were several messages on his phone, and he picked it up to see what they were. None was from Tommy. A couple of the guys had messaged in the group message about their activities this Friday night. As he set the phone down, he noticed an alert icon and looked to see what it was. He expected the phone to be alerting him it was time for an update or something similar. Instead, it alerted him that the searches were complete. He stared at the computer screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. Surreal seemed ineffective to explain the feeling he was experiencing. It was not possible. His finger hovered above the right mouse button as the cursor sat on Delete History. One quick click and it would all go away. He deleted the entries and sent Tommy a new message. T, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think at least some of the conspiracy theories are right. I just woke up from a dream where I was researching things and my phone was finding the answers just the way I was thinking them. It was like I already knew it, but needed to see it on the phone to remember it. The weird part is, when I got out here to my desk, all the things I'd been researching in the dream were alerted and on my search history on my phone. Thank you for spending your time with me. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join the conversation. That's all for now, but I'll be back again soon with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.